Sarah Martinez walked into the busy coffee shop on Main Street, her worn sneakers making soft sounds on the tile floor. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, nothing fancy or expensive. Her long black hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she looked tired from working 2 jobs just to pay rent on her small apartment. The other customers barely noticed her as she stood in line. Sarah was used to being invisible. She worked as a cleaning lady at night and stocked shelves at a grocery store during the day. Most people looked right through her as if she didn't matter at all. Behind her in line, 3 women in expensive clothes whispered and giggled. They had perfect makeup, designer handbags, and the kind of confidence that comes from never worrying about money. Sarah could hear bits of their conversation about their weekend shopping trips and fancy restaurant reservations. When Sarah reached the counter, she carefully counted out exact change from her small purse to buy the cheapest coffee on the menu. The teenage cashier rolled her eyes impatiently as Sarah searched for the last few pennies. The 3 women behind her sighed loudly and made comments about people who should stay home if they can't afford coffee. Sarah's face turned red with embarrassment, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. She took her coffee and found an empty table in the corner, away from everyone else. As she sat down, one of the expensive women walked past her table with her friends. The woman looked down at Sarah with disgust and said loudly enough for others to hear, "Some people really don't belong in places like this. Look at her clothes and those cheap shoes. It's embarrassing." Her friends laughed and agreed, making more cruel comments about Sarah's appearance. They talked about how she probably couldn't even read the menu properly, and suggested the coffee shop should have dress codes to keep out undesirable people. Sarah stared down at her coffee cup, fighting back tears. She wanted to disappear completely. The words hurt more than she wanted to admit, but she had heard similar things before. Being poor in this town meant being treated like she was worth nothing. What none of these people knew was that Sarah had secrets hidden beneath her simple clothes. On her left shoulder, covered by her sweater, was a tattoo that told a story no one would believe. It was a story of courage, sacrifice, and service to her country that these cruel strangers could never imagine. The tattoo was a military insignia surrounded by dates and coordinates that marked some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Sarah had earned that tattoo through blood, sweat, and tears in ways that would shock everyone in this comfortable coffee shop. But Sarah kept her past hidden. She had learned that people made up their minds about others based on appearances, and her current situation made her an easy target for judgment. She never talked about her military service or the medals gathering dust in a box under her bed. As she sipped her coffee, Sarah noticed a man in uniform enter the coffee shop. He was tall and confident, with the bearing of someone used to command. His Navy uniform was crisp and clean, with ribbons and insignia that marked him as a SEAL officer. He moved with the quiet alertness that Sarah recognized immediately. The 3 women who had been mocking Sarah suddenly straightened up and started whispering excitedly about the handsome military officer. They fixed their hair and practiced their best smiles, hoping to catch his attention. The SEAL officer ordered his coffee and looked around the shop for a place to sit. His eyes briefly met Sarah's across the room. She quickly looked away, not wanting any more attention. She had finished her coffee anyway, and was ready to leave for her afternoon shift at the grocery store. Sarah stood up and gathered her small purse, pulling her sweater tighter around her shoulders. She walked toward the exit, keeping her head down and hoping to slip out without any more embarrassing encounters. But as she passed near the SEAL officer's table, disaster struck in the most unexpected way. As Sarah hurried past the SEAL officer's table, her worn sneaker caught on the leg of a chair that someone had pushed out too far. She stumbled forward, losing her balance completely. Her small purse flew from her hands and she reached out desperately to catch herself from falling. Her hand grabbed the edge of the officer's table, but her momentum was too strong. She crashed into him, spilling his hot coffee all over his uniform and sending papers flying everywhere. The entire coffee shop went silent, and every eye turned to watch the clumsy woman who had just attacked a military officer. Sarah's face burned with humiliation as she scrambled to get up from where she had landed partially across the officer's lap. I'm so sorry," she whispered frantically, trying to help clean up the mess with napkins. Her hands were shaking with embarrassment and fear. The 3 wealthy women burst into loud laughter. "Oh my God, look at that!" one of them shrieked. She can't even walk properly. Did you see how she threw herself at him? How desperate and pathetic. Their laughter grew louder and meaner. She probably did it on purpose, another woman said. Some people have no shame at all. She's trying to get his attention because she knows she could never talk to a man like that normally. Other customers started laughing too, taking pictures with their phones and making jokes about the poor woman who couldn't afford coffee, but somehow managed to assault a Navy SEAL. Someone called out, maybe she should stick to places more her speed, like fast food joints. Sarah wanted to run away and never come back, but she was still trying to clean up the coffee and gather the scattered papers. Her sweater had gotten twisted during the fall, and she kept tugging at it to keep it in place, terrified that her tattoo might show. The SEAL officer, Commander Jake Thompson, had remained surprisingly calm during the chaos. He was used to much worse situations than spilled coffee. But as he helped Sarah collect his papers from the floor, something made him pause. Sarah was reaching for a document that had slid under another table, and her sweater had pulled up slightly on her left side. For just a split second, Jake caught a glimpse of something that made his breath catch. It looked like part of a military tattoo, but that couldn't be right. This nervous, embarrassed woman didn't fit any picture of a service member he had in his mind. "Miss, please don't worry about it," Jake said gently, trying to get a better look without being obvious. "Accidents happen." "Are you hurt?" Sarah shook her head quickly, still not looking at him directly. No, I'm fine. I'm so sorry about your uniform and your papers. I can pay for cleaning, I just need a few days to get the money together." Her voice was barely above a whisper. The cruel laughter continued around them. Someone had started a video on their phone, probably planning to post it online with a funny caption about clumsy poor people. The three wealthy women were wiping tears from their eyes. They found it so amusing. "Look at her trying to pay for his dry cleaning," one of them gasped between laughs. "With what money? She probably makes less in a week than his uniform costs." Jake felt anger rising in his chest at the cruelty he was witnessing, but something else was bothering him more. That glimpse of the tattoo had triggered a memory, something important that he couldn't quite place. He needed to see it clearly to be sure. "Miss," he said carefully, "I think you might have hurt your shoulder in the fall. You keep favoring your left arm. Maybe you should have someone look at it." Sarah froze. She realized she had been unconsciously rubbing her left shoulder, right where her tattoo was hidden. "No, it's fine, really. I need to go to work now. Again, I'm very sorry." She started to back away toward the exit, but Jake couldn't let her leave. Not yet. Not until he was sure about what he thought he had seen. Because if he was right, then everything about this situation was about to change dramatically. "Wait," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Please wait just one moment." Sarah stopped, her heart pounding. The laughter around them was starting to die down as people sensed something was happening. The SEAL officer was looking at her with an intensity that made her want to disappear into the floor. Jake approached her slowly, the way he might approach a scared animal. His mind was racing through possibilities, trying to match what he thought he had seen with the frightened woman in front of him. Jake Thompson stood perfectly still, staring at Sarah with an expression that was becoming more intense by the second. The coffee shop had grown quieter, with people sensing that something unexpected was unfolding before their eyes. "I need to ask you something," Jake said, his voice steady but urgent. "And I need you to answer me honestly." Sarah clutched her sweater tighter around her shoulders, panic rising in her throat. She could see in his eyes that he had noticed something, and she wasn't ready for anyone to know the truth about her past. "I really need to go to work," she whispered. "Afghanistan, 2019, Jake said suddenly, watching her face carefully. "Kandahar Province. Operation Desert Storm follow-up missions." Sarah's face went completely white. Those words hit her like physical blows, bringing back memories she had spent years trying to forget. Her hands started trembling and she took an involuntary step backward. The three wealthy women had stopped laughing and were listening with confusion. "What's he talking about?" one of them whispered to her friends. "Afghanistan? What does that have to do with anything?" Jake continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. "You were there, weren't you? You served." It wasn't really a question anymore. He could see the truth in her terrified expression and the way her body had gone rigid with shock. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah managed to say, but her voice was shaking badly. "I've never been to Afghanistan. I work at a grocery store." But Jake was remembering more now. Something about her face, her posture, the way she moved. Even scared and embarrassed, there was something familiar about her that went beyond the glimpse of the tattoo. "Please," he said more gently. "I think I know who you are. I think we've met before under very different circumstances." Sarah shook her head desperately. She had worked so hard to leave that life behind, to forget the things she had seen and done. Coming home had been the hardest thing she had ever experienced. Harder even than the combat deployments. The other customers were completely silent now, sensing drama but not understanding what was happening. The wealthy women looked back and forth between Jake and Sarah, their earlier amusement replaced by confusion and growing concern. "Show me," Jake said quietly, but with unmistakable command in his voice. "Show me your shoulder." "No," Sarah whispered. "Please, I can't. I just want to go home." Jake's expression softened with understanding. He recognized the signs of someone struggling with demons from their service. He had seen it in too many good soldiers who came home to find that civilian life was harder than war in its own way. "You don't have to be ashamed," he said gently. "Whatever happened over there, whatever you did, you served your country with honor. There's nothing to hide from." Tears started streaming down Sarah's face. She was trapped between her desperate need to remain invisible and the growing certainty that this man somehow knew exactly who she was. The coffee shop manager started walking over, concerned about the disturbance in the crying woman. Other customers were pulling out their phones again, but this time they seemed to sense they were witnessing something more serious than a clumsy accident. "Please don't make me do this here," Sarah begged. "Not in front of all these people." Jake looked around at the crowd of curious faces and realized she was right. Whatever this was about, it deserved privacy and respect. But he also knew that if he let her walk out of here now, he might never get another chance to solve the puzzle that was forming in his mind. "Okay," he said firmly. "We'll go somewhere private, but we are going to talk about this. You're not disappearing on me." One of the wealthy women couldn't contain her curiosity anymore. "What's going on here?" she demanded loudly. "What does Afghanistan have to do with her? She's just a cleaning lady or something." Jake turned to look at the woman with such cold intensity that she actually took a step backward. "Ma'am, I suggest you mind your own business. This is a military matter now." The authority in his voice was unmistakable. This was a man used to being in charge of life and death situations, and everyone in the coffee shop suddenly realized they were witnessing something far more serious than they had thought. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to compose herself. She looked at Jake and saw something in his expression that she hadn't seen in civilian eyes for years. He was looking at her not with pity or curiosity, but with the recognition that one warrior gives to another. "There's a park across the street," she said quietly. "We can talk there." Jake nodded and gathered his papers and hat. As they prepared to leave together, he turned back to address the coffee shop full of staring people. "That woman," he said, pointing at Sarah, "deserves your respect, not your judgment. You have no idea what she's sacrificed for your freedom." They sat on a bench in the small park across from the coffee shop, far enough from other people to have privacy. Sarah kept her arms wrapped around herself, still trying to hold her sweater in place. Jake waited patiently, giving her time to find the courage to speak. "I don't understand how you could possibly know anything about me," Sarah finally said. "I've been very careful to keep my past separate from my life here." Jake leaned forward slightly. "I've been trying to place you since I saw that tattoo. Something about your face was familiar too, but I couldn't put it together at first. Now I think I know why." He paused, studying her profile. "You're not just any veteran, are you? You were Special Forces. That tattoo I glimpsed, it's not standard military issue." Sarah's breath caught. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I've only seen that particular insignia on a handful of people in my entire career. It's for a classified unit that most people don't even know exists." Jake's voice was quiet but certain. "You were a combat medic with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, weren't you?" The color drained from Sarah's face completely. She stared at him in shock, unable to speak for several long moments. "The Night Stalkers," she whispered finally. "But that information is classified." "How do you—" "Because I was there," Jake said simply. "Afghanistan, 2019. I commanded a SEAL team that your unit supported on multiple operations. We worked together for months." Sarah's hands started shaking again as memories came flooding back. The helicopter missions into hostile territory. treating wounded soldiers under enemy fire, the faces of men she had saved and others she couldn't save. I still don't remember you specifically, she admitted. There were so many missions, so many different teams we worked with. Jake nodded understandingly. You wouldn't remember me personally, but I remember your work. Your unit had a reputation for never leaving anyone behind, no matter how dangerous the situation got. He looked directly into her eyes. I remember hearing about a medic who crawled through enemy fire to reach wounded soldiers. Someone who performed surgery in the back of a helicopter while taking fire. Someone who saved more lives in 6 months than most medics save in entire careers. Tears started flowing down Sarah's cheeks again, but this time they were different. These weren't tears of shame or embarrassment, but of recognition and remembered pain. That feels like a lifetime ago, she said quietly. Like it happened to a different person. What happened? Jake asked gently. How did you go from being a decorated special operations medic to working in a grocery store and letting people treat you like you're worthless? Sarah was quiet for a long time, watching people walk by in the park. Normal people living normal lives, people who had never seen what she had seen or done what she had done. I got injured on my last mission, she said finally. IED blast damaged my left shoulder and gave me a traumatic brain injury. The shoulder healed mostly, but the TBI caused problems with memory and concentration. The military medically retired me. Jake listened without interrupting, recognizing the pain in her voice. When I came home, I couldn't adjust, Sarah continued. Everything felt wrong. Too quiet, too safe, too meaningless. I had nightmares every night. I couldn't hold a regular job because of the memory problems and anxiety attacks. She pulled her sweater tighter around herself. I ended up homeless for a while. Lost everything I had saved during my service. When I finally got back on my feet, the only jobs I could get were ones that didn't require references or background checks. But why hide your service? Jake asked. Why not get help from veteran services? Sarah laughed bitterly. You think I didn't try? The VA is overwhelmed and understaffed. My disability claim has been pending for 3 years. And most people don't understand what women went through over there. Especially women in special operations. It's easier to be invisible than to constantly explain myself. Jake felt a wave of anger at the system that had failed this hero, but also a growing sense of purpose. He was beginning to understand not just who Sarah was, but why fate had brought them together in that coffee shop. Sarah, he said, and she looked up in surprise at hearing her name. Sarah Martinez. I remember now. You saved my teammate's life on a mission outside Kandahar. Sergeant Mike Chen. You performed surgery on him in a helicopter while we were still taking fire. Sarah's eyes widened as the memory came flooding back. Mike, yes, I remember. He had internal bleeding from shrapnel. We almost lost him 3 times during that flight. He's alive today because of you, Jake said firmly. He has a wife and 2 kids now. He talks about you every time I see him. For the first time since Jake had met her, Sarah smiled. A real smile that transformed her entire face and gave him a glimpse of the confident, capable woman she had been. But the smile faded quickly as reality returned. That doesn't change anything about my situation now. Jake stood up from the bench with sudden determination. Actually, it changes everything. Come with me. Where are we going? Sarah asked nervously as she followed him back toward the coffee shop. We're going to set some things straight, Jake said firmly. Those people in there need to learn exactly who they were laughing at. Sarah grabbed his arm in panic. Please, no. I don't want any more attention. I just want to disappear. Jake stopped and turned to face her. Sarah, you've been hiding and disappearing for years. How's that working out for you? She looked down at the ground, unable to argue with the truth in his words. You saved lives, Jake continued. You served your country with distinction in one of the most dangerous jobs in the military. You deserve respect, not ridicule, and those people in there need to understand what real courage looks like. Despite her fear, Sarah felt something stirring inside her that she hadn't felt in years. A tiny spark of the pride and confidence she had once carried as a soldier. They walked back into the coffee shop together. The 3 wealthy women were still there, now sitting at a table and talking in animated whispers about the strange scene they had witnessed. Other customers kept glancing toward the door, curious about what had happened. Jake walked directly to the counter and spoke to the manager in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. Excuse me, I need to make an announcement to your customers. The manager looked nervous but nodded. Jake turned to face the room full of people. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to tell you about the woman who was in here earlier. The woman that some of you found so amusing to mock and laugh at. The coffee shop went dead silent. Sarah stood beside Jake, her face red with embarrassment but her chin raised slightly higher than before. Her name is Sarah Martinez, Jake continued. She is a United States Army veteran who served multiple tours in Afghanistan as a special operations combat medic. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The three wealthy women looked shocked and suddenly uncomfortable. While you were safe at home complaining about traffic and long lines at Starbucks, she was crawling through enemy fire to save wounded soldiers. She performed life-saving surgery in helicopters while being shot at by terrorists. Jake's voice grew stronger and more commanding. She has more courage in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies. She risked her life repeatedly to save others, including members of my own team. Sarah felt tears starting again, but for the first time they weren't tears of shame. They were tears of recognition and gratitude for finally being seen for who she really was. One of the wealthy women stood up shakily. "We didn't know," she said weakly. "She didn't look like." "Like what?" Jake interrupted. "Like your stereotypical idea of a soldier? Let me tell you something about real heroes. They don't wear their medals to the grocery store. They don't brag about their service to impress people at coffee shops. They quietly go about their lives, often struggling with injuries and trauma that the rest of us can't even imagine." He gestured toward Sarah. This woman was medically retired after being injured by an IED while saving lives. She came home to a country that promised to take care of its veterans, but instead left her to fight bureaucracy and stigma. And instead of getting the help and respect she deserved, she ended up working multiple jobs just to survive. The coffee shop was so quiet that you could hear people breathing. Several customers had tears in their eyes. The next time you see someone who doesn't meet your standards for appearance or behavior, I suggest you remember this moment. Jake continued. You have no idea what that person has been through or what they've sacrificed for your freedom. He turned to the three wealthy women specifically. Your expensive clothes and perfect makeup don't make you better than anyone. They just make you lucky. This woman has earned her place in any establishment in America through her service and sacrifice. One of the women started crying. "I'm so sorry," she said to Sarah. "I had no idea. Please forgive us." Sarah looked at the woman for a long moment, then spoke quietly but clearly. "I forgive you. But I hope you'll remember this the next time you're tempted to judge someone you don't know." The manager of the coffee shop stepped forward. "Ma'am, your coffee is on the house from now on, and thank you for your service." Other customers began approaching Sarah, some shaking her hand, others simply saying thank you. The atmosphere in the coffee shop had completely transformed from mockery to respect. But Jake wasn't finished yet. He had one more surprise for Sarah, something that would change her life in a way she never expected. As the crowd in the coffee shop began to disperse, Jake pulled Sarah aside. "I have something else to tell you. Something that might change your situation." Sarah looked at him curiously, still overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. "I'm not just here for coffee," Jake explained. "I'm in town on official business. The Navy is opening a new veteran rehabilitation center here, and I'm in charge of hiring the medical staff." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of medical staff?" "We need experienced combat medics to work with returning veterans who have PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and other service-related injuries. People who understand what they've been through because they've been through it themselves." Jake smiled at the look of hope beginning to appear in Sarah's eyes. "The pay is excellent, and it comes with full medical benefits and housing assistance. But more importantly, it's a chance to use your skills and experience to help other veterans who are struggling the way you've been struggling." Sarah felt dizzy with the possibility of it. "But my medical discharge, my brain injury, my employment history are exactly what make you perfect for this job," Jake interrupted. "You understand both sides of the medical equation. You know what it's like to be the medic trying to save lives, and you know what it's like to be the wounded veteran trying to rebuild your life." He pulled out his business card and wrote something on the back. "This is my direct number. I want you to call me tomorrow morning and we'll set up a proper interview. But Sarah, I'm telling you right now, the job is yours if you want it." Sarah stared at the card in her hands, hardly daring to believe this was real. Why would you do this for me? You barely remember me from Afghanistan. Jake's expression grew serious. Because every veteran who served with honor deserves a second chance. Because your country owes you better than grocery store jobs and people laughing at you in coffee shops. And because I know what kind of medic you were over there. And I know what kind of person you are now. He paused, looking directly into her eyes. But mostly because Mike Chen is my brother-in-law, and he's been looking for you for years to thank you for saving his life. When I tell him I found you, he's going to want to throw you a parade. Sarah laughed through her tears, the first genuine laugh she had experienced in months. I can't believe this is happening. Believe it, Jake said firmly. Your hiding days are over, Sarah Martinez. It's time to come back to who you really are. 3 months later, Sarah walked through the halls of the new Veteran Rehabilitation Center, wearing clean scrubs and a name tag that read, Dr. Sarah Martinez, Combat Trauma Specialist. She had used her veteran benefits to complete her nursing degree and was now working toward becoming a physician assistant. The wealthy woman from the coffee shop, whose name was Jennifer, had tracked Sarah down to apologize again and ended up making a substantial donation to the Veteran Center in Sarah's honor. She had also started volunteering there once a week, learning about the challenges facing returning veterans. Jake stopped by Sarah's office regularly, partly for official business but mostly to check on his friend. The respect and purpose that had returned to Sarah's life had transformed her completely. She stood taller, spoke with confidence, and had become a fierce advocate for veterans' rights. Any regrets about leaving your invisible life behind? Jake asked during one of his visits. Sarah looked out her office window at the veterans she was now helping to heal and rebuild their lives. None at all. Thank you for not letting me disappear. Thank you for reminding me why we serve, Jake replied. Heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and they don't always look like what people expect. That afternoon, as Sarah finished her shift, she stopped by the same coffee shop where her life had changed. The manager waved and had her usual coffee ready before she reached the counter. The 3 women who had mocked her were there again, but now they stood up when they saw her, genuine smiles on their faces. Dr. Martinez, Jennifer said warmly. How are the new patients settling in at the center? Sarah smiled back, comfortable now with the attention and respect she had earned. They're making progress. Healing takes time, but they're getting the help they deserve. As she walked home to her new apartment, Sarah touched the tattoo on her shoulder that was no longer hidden under shapeless sweaters. She wore it proudly now, along with all the other reminders of her service. The woman who had once been invisible had found her way back to being seen, valued, and honored for exactly who she was. And in helping other veterans find their own paths back to dignity and purpose, she had discovered that her greatest mission was still ahead of her. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with courage, compassion, and the simple act of refusing to let good people disappear into the shadows of a society that has forgotten their worth.